So, okay, second point, which I think is more apropos. I read the analysis and the newspaper article, and this is more than a 30% raise. And it's being justified on the basis of the net legal budget has gone down during Mr. Connors' tenure at Atherton. Now, I don't mean this to be an indictment of Mr. Connors, but I don't think you can draw a conclusion that he is the reason the legal budget has gone down. There's happenstance, there's circumstances, there's other things. This town also laid off a large number of employees recently, and is supposed to be in a very deep budget crisis. However, what I would support, and I think this is what would be done in the private sector in something like this, is to offer Mr. Connors the $3,000 or $36,000 a year as a performance bonus. That is, if in fact, during his conservatorship as town attorney, the legal budget stays under a certain number, then pay him the $36,000. But don't just assume that it's automatically going to be the case because of what happened over the past year and grant that type of raise. I think that's a much more fiscally responsible thing to do.
Are there any other public comments with regards to item 12? So then we'll bring it back to the council, and I think Kathy.
So I made the motion to accept the contract with subject to a review.
Satisfactory.
A satisfactory review, yes.
I'd like to amend that and say that that we agree that it would be a retroactive contract pending the satisfactory review. It's fine. So that way the contract isn't approved per se, but it's approved with retroactive application, which I think meets the needs of what.
That's kind of a
Can we
new
add
motion,
that language?
actually.
Yes, and pending the monitoring of
Other legal developments of municipalities. Okay.
Okay. Any other? Okay, so
Can you, since I'm going to have to rewrite this, can you explain your amendment? The part about it's retroactive, I understand that, but the motion was to approve the contract, and it is automatically retroactive to February 1st. I'm just not sure I understood exactly what you were saying.
well, the contract would be essentially after the performance appraisal, a threshold function would be you pass the performance, and then the contract becomes enforced, as opposed to the contract is approved and enforced pending. So.
Well, essentially, you took my motion and reversed it. So what we should do is have my motion either be seconded or die, and then you could make the new motion, which would be clearer, right? Because you're essentially taking my motion
I still don't understand.
and reversing it.
Withdraw.
I'll withdraw my motion in favor of the mayor's motion to have a performance review and make the contract retroactive to February 1st, subject to a satisfactory performance review. That's what you were saying.
Yes, thank you.
And I'll second that.
And that includes Councilmember McKeithen's language.
The jurisdictions. Yeah. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, then we move on to item 13, Councilmember Keeton again.
Destruction of records. I have a couple of questions, please. Chief Flint, can you tell me how voluminous are these records? And how much space do they occupy?
Councilmember McKeithen, this is pretty standard operating procedures for police departments. We have files, particularly personnel complaints, and they involve, they're within the statute by government code and penal code. We get rid of them. We don't get rid of them if there's pending litigation or we have an employee with a reoccurring problem or deficiency. We would hang on to those. But in many of these cases, these employees have been gone for 4 or 5 years, and the reports are, the files are in excess of 5 years of age.
Could you answer my question? How voluminous are these files? How much space do they
Oh, how
occupy?
much space? That's not really the issue, it's
That's
just
my
more
question.
housekeeping. No, we could probably keep more for a longer period
How
of time.
much space do they occupy? This
A
much?
couple of file cabinets, 4-foot drawers.
Okay.
Yep.
And do any of these formal complaints or investigations, now there are 8 formal citizen complaints and 2 investigations, is my understanding.
Correct.
Do any of them involve any officers that are presently on working for Atherton?
Yes.
Would it not make sense that to the extent any of those involve people who are presently working for Atherton to keep the records, no matter how long, how old they are?
I think that's what you pay me to do, to take a look at that and see if they're relevant, if they were sustained or not sustained, is it a reoccurring deficiency, and make that decision based on what statute and policy allows us to do.
Well, you were not the chief of police at the time, and we have had some, as you well know, we've had some varied sort of efficiencies over the last few years. And so sustainability or non-sustainability isn't necessarily something that would be apparent from the record at the time. I would think, and let me put it this way, as someone who watches Law and Order a lot, when they go and they look at Lenny and they say, Lenny, you know, and he's on the stand, they go back and look at his entire record. They don't just go back 5 years. They look at everything he's done and they say, you've had so many official complaints against you. I would like to think that whether or not something has been sustained, that we would at least know that if someone has had a similar complaint against him or her 10 years ago, that if it looks like it's the same, and it was a big issue then, that it's something that we would perhaps want to look at again and say, well, gee, well, maybe even though it wasn't sustained, there may have been something there as well, especially when I see what was going on, and you look at it again with different eyes. Especially if it doesn't involve the occupation of a lot of space. If these people are still on the force, I can see if they're not still on the force, there would be no reason to keep it. But if these are still people who are here in Atherton, given the fact that we have our own police force, it's a small community, more than 55% of our budget goes to support the police. We're in a kind of a unique situation from most police departments in the state. And I think that we should be held to a higher standard of accountability, and that goes for record keeping. So I would think that maybe if you had been the police chief throughout that period of time, I might have a different sort of circumspection of the whole thing, but you were not. And thus, I feel that it's something that we should probably hold on to. That's my feeling.
Any other council comments? All right, public comment?
Yes. I actually have a lot to say about this because I was quoted in today's Daily Post article about it. And I think there are certain facts, before we get to opinions, that are very clear. This is not an issue of the town renting a warehouse and paying rent to hold records. It's not a space issue, first and foremost. The law says that there is a minimum amount of time that must be kept, but no maximum amount of time. There's no law that would be broken for Atherton to keep these records longer. The article says that none of the records involve current officers. I think you just clarified that that's not true, but certainly the list was far longer before I wrote a letter to the city attorney demanding that no records be destroyed for any officer who was involved in my litigation, which was complied with. Now, when I went to school, there was a concept of your permanent record. And if you did something that wasn't good, it would go on your permanent record. And it was a very big deterrent from doing anything. And I also think that Atherton residents pay more per capita for police services than any other municipality in the state of Chief Flint, you mentioned that these records were not sustained complaints. The fact of the matter is that for the past 12 years, there hasn't been a single sustained complaint in Atherton. That is, whenever a citizen has made a police complaint, the 3 previous police chiefs, Bob Brennan, Glenn Nielsen, and Mike Guerra, never would sustain any of them. Now, some of us believe that that shouldn't have been the case, but you can't simply look at that classification to say that these records should be destroyed. Moreover, I happen to know that some of the records that you've asked to be destroyed do involve repeat complaints with the same officers, some of whom are still on the force. So I think this is wrong. I think you've done a lot to help accountability in Atherton, and I've applauded you for that, but this just should not be happening.
Are there any other public comments on this item? So we'll bring it back to the council.
I guess I'm inclined to trust the judgment of our chief of police on this matter myself.
Jim?
I feel the same way, and I think if Ed Flint feels that any of these records could be used in the future, you know, either for the town or to harm the town, they should be kept. But I would also accept his judgment on this.
Well, I had questions with the city manager and also the city attorney about this whole resolution and the language of it. And you know, I said, so the ordinance says, you know, that they get to review and then decide. And so what standards are they reviewing it by? What are the standards that they're going to decide? And who gets to make those decisions? And so these questions I asked both the city manager, the interim city manager, and the city attorney about this, answered me that it's the review of the documents, the chief of police is given the authority to review them and determine whether or not they are relevant in current litigation or that they would be needed at a future date. And so those questions were answered, my questions were answered adequately. So I do have a lot of confidence in our new chief of police. I think it's evident that since his time on staff with us that there's been very, very positive changes. You read his reports about the professionalism that our police officers are giving even what might appear to be a vagrant in the middle of the night wandering around Lindenwood with a shopping cart, but then the vagrant happened to be a blind veteran trying to get to the VA hospital in the middle of the night, and they took him there. And then the veteran called and left a very congratulatory message on the police dispatch, thanking the police officers for such a fine job and being so professional to him. So I have a lot of confidence in our city attorney at this point and our chief of police. So I feel that this is reasonable.
I think it's all well and good that you all have so much confidence in the chief of police, but we represent the people of the town of Atherton. And I think that there's an adage that says, you know, if it's not just the facts, but it's public perception. And clearly public perception has questioned this action. All you, I am sure, have received emails regarding this action that's being proposed. It is a minimal amount of space that we're talking about. It's a minimal number of years. It is certainly a large dollar item that we are talking about in terms of what costs the police department, the town of Atherton subsidizes. And I think that given the public perception, it is important that we do everything possible to show that we are above board. And if that means a retention of some records for a longer period of time while these people are on our police force, I think it's little enough to do. And it's not me or you or any one of us sitting up here, but it's the public that we're answerable to.
So my comments are that you know, first off, I do believe that our police force has improved its, not only its performance, but it's also its public perception. But as my fellow council member here has pointed out, and with the new information that we've gotten here tonight on the records, I think it's important that if somebody's still on the police force, that we do maintain those records for the people that are on the force, whether the complaint was sustained or not. If the officer is no longer here and the 5 years have gone, or on some of the other items that are on the list, I'm okay with having those items purged, if it's important to purge them. So I'd like to make a motion that we amend this and we approve the disposal of records that don't involve officers that are still here. If we need to go do that, but we retain, and we have a process that we would retain records for officers who are still on the force until such time that they've left the force and a period of time has gone by. I don't know if you vote a second for that.
Second.
Could I please ask through the city manager for police chief to comment if he wants to?
Sure. Do you have any further comments, Ed?
Yeah, just one. I certainly understand your feelings about that. I would not, and by the way, I just want to comment on the public comment that there were, in fact, under the other chiefs, investigations that were done on employee misconduct in the police department, and they were sustained. I looked at those.
Not by a citizen complaint,
Well, I don't want to get in an argument about it, but I did look at those. In fact, when I did the review back in March before I became your interim chief, I looked at just about every file that we had on every officer at all of the IAs. And, you know, I feel comfortable with what I put forward. And by the way, I'm so confident that the ones on the officers that are still here that are kind of insignificant in nature, are not sustained, I don't have a real problem with keeping them for a while. This is just a standardized procedure supported by law and policy, and I'm just trying to follow the rules that other police departments follow, and I don't think that there's a problem. If I had an employee in the police department that I thought had reoccurring deficiencies, and they had records, sustained or not sustained, I would keep them.
The records.
Absolutely. If it was an employee that I thought was problematic. And in fact, in a couple of cases, I made that decision.
You're not offended if we say we'd like you to keep them if they're still on the police force? That's what I heard you say.
Oh, I'm not offended at all.
May I add, Atherton hasn't had a records destruction policy ever up until 2010. So these are going to start coming forward from all the departments, public works, building, admin especially, because we just don't have the space for these records.
I don't think this motion changes anything particularly, so I would be also in favor of it.
So now we have a vote. I think we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye. Aye.
All opposed?
Okay, item 14, approval of a one-year lease extension with Knox Place Schools. If you remember, we met with Mike Kashiwagi and our attorney and had discussed preliminarily this, and this is something that I believe it reminds me of discussing events in the park, rentals in the park. Here we have something that produces approximately $90,000 over 14 months, it says. Here is something that 31 Atherton children are enrolled in and gives preference to Atherton residents. Here we have something that really, no matter what is said, does not impact other events in the park and is not needed to maintain flexibility with regard to any foreseeable thing that's going to be happening in the park, and that includes if a library should go in the park. It wouldn't affect, to the extent I'm on the library steering committee, anything I know that we've been thinking about. And moreover, to the extent you offer just a one-year lease to the play school, it offers them no incentive to make what are apparently some very much needed renovations to the play school. So while I understand making it a one-year lease, I would like to suggest that this is something else that we should look at and consider making an extension to the Knox Play School agreement beyond the 1 year, with the understanding, and this is what Mike and I had discussed with Bill, making an extension for additional years with the understanding that only in the event that the Knox Play School makes necessary renovations to the play school would there be extensions of the lease. Thus, the city would have an improved asset, which it owns. The play school would have the advantage of additional years in its contract. We would have the additional $90,000 or $80,000, whatever it comes to, for the 1 year. The Atherton residents would have their children in the play school, and it would be a totally win-win situation. So I would like to suggest that that provision, either we consider it now or at some future date, but that perhaps a provision be added saying that we allow the play school to have additional years with the understanding that they make the necessary renovations that are determined to be necessary by the building official to the play school for the safety of the children.
Jim, you also pulled this?
Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe Jim go first.
I would say that they want a multi-year extension, and we have said we'll give you a 1 year extension. I understand some of the comments of Councilmember McKeeson. Perhaps what we can do here is to say, we don't really know what's going to happen to the park at the moment, but I suspect in 6 months we'll have a much better feeling of what's going to happen to the park. So my suggestion would be that we tell them that while at the moment we can't agree to a multi-year extension, that we will reopen the discussion with them in 6 months' time, and dependent on the situation at that time, it's possible that we will agree to it. Not commit to it, but we will agree to it. And I think that way we kind of keep them feeling a bit better, and we don't make any decisions that we might not want to make, because I think in 6 months we'll have a much better understanding of what's going on.
The question, I have a question and a comment. Question, you mentioned making improvements. We own the buildings, I believe, so you'd be asking the operator then to improve the buildings using their own funds on that. Has there been any discussion with them at all? Was that something that they would be?
I had asked Mike to speak with them about it, but I don't know if that discussion took place.
No, that discussion hasn't taken place yet. From the staff standpoint, what we would suggest is if the council wishes to have the preschool continue at the park, to go ahead and extend the 1 year, and then direct us to come back with a more longer term, lease proposal. Keep in mind that the buildings out there are portable buildings, and I think in one case, close to 20 years old. So in our opinion, it's really beyond its useful life. So if the school were to continue longer than 1 year, what we would want to do as part of that negotiation is to negotiate, really not necessarily repair, but possibly replacement of those existing buildings.
My comment is that picking up on what Jim was saying, we don't really know what may happen in the future, is that one of the things that could happen is that we may decide that, or somebody may recommend that the preschool be relocated in the park at a different location, and because there is quite a potential bottleneck there from a traffic standpoint where it's located right now. So I guess I would be in favor of 1 year extension and following through with what Mike's doing, looking at the buildings, and maybe give us a little more time to think long-term about a park master plan.
I totally agree with Councilmember Carlson's comments. The staff report was not very deep in the financial analysis, and there was no mention of any potential tenant improvements that the tenant was proposing to make for any kind of a longer term lease. So I know that it's important for a school to have the security that they are going to be able to take registrations for the next school year, and so a one-year lease extension at this junction is, I think, appropriate. And my assessment of the buildings that they're in, they're very poor condition, and the temporary one, I mean, it really needs, I think, much more improvements than what this operator may be willing to invest in, even for a multi-year lease. And there is the traffic issue at that bottleneck. So I think that doing a one-year extension of this junction is a good thing.
Why don't we take public comments? Oh, sorry.
I wish to respond. The reason that there is no discussion of what the lessee would be willing to improve is because the lessee was never approached with what she might be willing to do. So that's pretty obvious that she could not possibly have stated whether or not she'd be willing to put another unit in there or make any improvements.
She did meet with the former interim city manager, and I'm not sure if she's in, okay.
Oh, good, you're here, so you can discuss this issue.
Speak for yourself.
But I will go back to, I think once the EIR for the library sites is finalized, that might be a perfect opportunity, because they will have looked at the traffic
That's why I suggested 6
determine
months.
whether or not, yes, I think 6 months is a good thing, whether or not the traffic is an issue, and if they think that it should be relocated, and if not, that might be the time to consider relocation, or what do we want to do with it. But not an 11th hour renewal of the lease, but to give the operator some time, the lessee some time to make some informed decisions as to what she wants to do with the future of this building, rather than on a year-to-year sort of 3-month basis.
Why don't we have Mrs. Knox come up?
Hi. Hi, I'm Susan Knox. I did speak with John Danielson, I guess, before he left. So just to clarify, the first building is about 40 years old, and that's the one that's in pretty bad shape. There's some splitting in the foundation. And the second building's only 10 years old. That one's pretty good. So it would probably be replacement of the original building, I think, is what, those portables have about a lifespan of 30 years, I think. So anyway, the reason that I had an original 5-year lease with a 5-year option, which we exercised. And then because of all the transition in the park, we just did a 1-year renewal, sort of waiting to see what was going to happen. And that's kind of what's going on here too, is because of the uncertainty of the library and the master plan of the park, that we decided to do a 1-year and then give you guys time to decide, is it going to affect the preschool? Are we going to relocate? Are we going to be allowed to continue? Those sorts of things. I, of course, would like a longer term lease. I would like to build in there some, type of renewal or, replacement of the building. But right now, we thought it was prudent to just do a 1-year, because right now is enrollment time for fall, and that's why we were pushing it for February. Any other questions?
How do you feel about making some of the contributing to the replacement?
It's possible. I mean, replacing those buildings is very expensive. When I did it 10 years ago, we built the second building, and the way that we structured it was I paid for the building to be built, but then I didn't pay rent on it for a certain term of the lease. I think it was the first 5 years. So I didn't pay rent on that building, and I sort of paid off my loans for building that building. And then I gave it to the town and began to pay rent on it. So it was sort of structured that it was affordable and doable for everybody.
So it could be done, is what you're saying.
But it was sort of a big, a discussion of how are we going to do this if we need to. First, we have to get reports on it and see if it really needs to be replaced or if it can be.
You haven't had any reports on whether or not it could be rebuilt. Thank you.
Can this building withstand one more year?
Yes.
Any other questions for Mrs. Knox?
Well, I just would like to kind of have something in here that indicates that we will relook at this in 6 months.
Okay, we can add that as a motion, but do we have any other public comments?
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So, June?
Yeah, I would like to add to this motion that the council will review it in 6 months' time.
To do that, I think that implies some staff work should
Yeah.
take place before that time, so when we review it, there's some staff report and all that sort of thing that
Could that
would be
involve,
helpful, yeah.
could that also involve staff having preliminary conversations
Absolutely.
with
Yeah.
the school and understand really the types of investment that might be made, and then also, depending on who's making the investment, the corresponding cost with regards to the lease?
You know, can the existing structure be in some way remodeled, repaired? What if it were a new structure? How much would it cost? How could it be structured from a financing perspective? And also from the EIR, if this is not the ideal location, where might it be located?
It sounds like we have a consensus, though, of the council, that we'd like for the preschool to continue there.
Yes.
So
I think it's a valuable asset to the community, and it's $90,000 income per year.
So I think that there's essentially a motion to approve the one-year lease with the addition that in 6 months we will come back with a staff report, and you'll open discussions with the proprietor
Yes.
for council consideration after the library EIR and stuff.
The staff report would have options for us to consider and discuss at that time.
All right, so is there a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion passes. Next, item 15.
Property tax exchange. Now, that property tax exchange basically means that we get approximately 6% of the property tax, and the county gets about 20% of the property tax, because they're a fire district, and they get all kinds of stuff too. Which means that based upon the assessed value of this 5,400 plus square foot parcel, that we get $192 per year in property taxes. Incredible. Tell me something. Does this cause a triggering event of a reassessment of this parcel? I mean, because clearly now that it's going to be an Atherton parcel, it's worth 346,000 square foot parcel with an auxiliary structure on it, assessed at only $299,000. Is it going to be reassessed?
I'm going to let Deborah speak to that since she...
I'm going to ask Neil to help me if I get it wrong, but it should not trigger a reassessment, but any kind of new construction does go to the assessor's office to be put on the roll.
That's correct. I believe that a change of ownership or a new construction on the property would trigger a reassessment. Only that.
Well, forgive me, I've forgotten the last report. Why exactly do they want to do this? I mean, apart from the fact that part of their property is in an unincorporated area and part of it's in Atherton, and you'd like to have all of your property in one place, even if it's contiguous. I mean, and it's also going to be a lot more valuable to have it all in Atherton rather than part in the county and part in Atherton. But why exactly, what is the reason they've given publicly for this?
There's a county policy, and it falls under, I think, the LAFCO policies. LAFCO for the public is the Local Agency Formation Commission, and so within the staff report it does speak to that, and I'm sorry it's not something I'm as familiar with as I am with financial issues, but it has to do with some of the policies of the boundaries of an agency, you know, of the ownership of properties, just as you spoke of.
But it was the homeowner that asked to do this. And why did the homeowner? I mean, clearly that's why LAFCO is going along with this, but what prompted the homeowner to request it?
Probably easier to sell later on.
Well, yeah, I
Yeah,
know.
more money.
Yeah.
And at that point, it will be reassessed
Yeah.
if it changes titles. I think we approved the alignment of the property.
We did,
last time.
I remember that.
Yeah. So
Is
this
that,
is,
is that
this
other
is
parcel
ju-
going to be assessed a parcel tax?
It-
Can we even assess it a parcel tax?
This one is a little complicated and some things still have to be worked out with LAFCO because there's also a request to merge those two parcels. Currently, when you annex a property, you set up a new tax rate area. And so when you set up a new tax rate area, that's what was negotiated here for a portion of what the county was receiving in property taxes to go to the city. And I will confirm whether that property, if that property does fall into Atherton, then I believe it would be subject to the special parcel tax
So the
on the next roll.
The home would receive a special parcel tax, and the auxiliary structure property would have a special parcel tax.
If they remain two parcels, I believe the goal in the long run is to merge those two parcels.
And the merger wouldn't trigger a reassessment either?
I don't believe it triggers a reassessment, but
Well, that's a great deal. So they don't trigger a reassessment, they get a single parcel tax, and now all becomes Atherton property. And we only get 6%. Okay? I owned a lot in San Francisco, I couldn't do that when I bought the house next to me. All right, there are some typos in it. I'll give them to you.
Thank you.
Are there any other council comments on this item? No. Are there any public comments on this item? Okay, we'll come back to the council.
I will accept it.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
I'm abstaining, I'm not sure about this.
Okay. We will move on to number 8.